Hey everybody, welcome back into the garage here. So I've got my 86 300 ZX project behind me, and today we're going to be looking at the alternator. Okay, so we're getting near the end of the restoration project. I'm very close to being able to get it insured and back on the road, do some shakedown miles. And a couple of days ago, I started it for the first time in months and checking electrics and all the stuff, just going through everything from lights to switches. And, found a coolant hose leak and things like that to address. But the alternator didn't seem to be charging. And I do vaguely recall about a year ago when the one time I drove this car, when I drove it from further up the island down here, there was a point in the trip where the alternator didn't seem to be charging at the volts on the gauge were showing like around 12, and then it popped back up to 14 or whatever, and it was fine. And I sort of assumed, well, it's been sitting for a long time. The alternator is just coming around and going to work. Maybe that was the alternator starting to pack it in. I don't know, but it doesn't seem to be charging. We're going to be doing some tests and see if we can figure out what it is. Certainly not the most accessible part on this engine by any stretch. Now, this is a turbo, and I believe the turbo moves the alternator. It's under the power steering pump, and I think on the NA car it might be on the other side. But regardless, wiring should be the same. So we'll try and see if we can figure out what the problem is. I'm suspecting it's just going to be order a rebuilt alternator and put it in, but we'll go through the process. Okay, so before I start into this, I'll just remind people, if you haven't watched other videos in the series, I don't like electrical problems. I'm not an electrical engineer. Me and electricity don't get along well. I can't put a wrench on it. I can't physically see what the problem is. So I'm not a big fan of doing this sort of thing, but this has got to get sorted. So I'm going to show you how I do it. I'm not in any way saying this is the way you should do it, but come along, I'll show you how I mess about here and see if I can get this problem fixed. Okay, so I've had some stuff apart in here. I've got the car jacked up. I've got the wheel off to give me some more room. The splash shield is removed. And from looking at the wiring diagram and looking here, so the alternator's down here under the power steering pump. And again, this is a turbo, and I believe it's on the other side on an NA engine. But there is the what I would call the charging wire, the wire that takes power from the alternator up to the battery. It's a big white wire, and it runs up and it goes up to the fusible link, the first fusible link there, and then from the fusible link it goes around and connects up on the positive terminal. So being almost 40 years old, I figured the best thing to start to do was to see if that was actually a good line through there and that the fusible link was all right. So I checked, although I actually didn't have to do all of this, I checked from the terminal to the fusible link, and that was fine. I checked the other side of the fusible link through, and that was fine. So I know the fusible link's good. And then I've checked from the alternator where the spade fitting screws onto the back of the alternator back to there, and I have connectivity through that as well. So I know the line from the alternator up to the battery is good. So if the alternator is doing what it's supposed to do, power will get to the battery. The fact that it's not means it's something else. So what I'm going to do now is remove the alternator. There is a plug that you're supposed to disconnect there, and then if you ground what I believe is the brown wire, it should give you the alternator or volts warning light on the dash. And this is a digital dash in this car. Currently, when you put everything on, the light doesn't come on. So with the ignition on, the oil pressure light comes on, the volts doesn't. And it should, which says power is being used, but there's no power going in. So this test with the grounding that one wire in the plug is supposed to confirm that that light is working okay. So seems to me, due to the joy of the access here, particularly with the power steering lines that go down here, it's just a joy to get to between it and the engine mount. So we're going to take it out. It's coming out anyway. It's going to be coming out anyway. So we may as well get the alternator out, and then we can see everything on what's going on down there. Okay, here we are under the car. They said splash shield's gone. And what obviously, that's the alternator. This is the tensioner for the belt. And then there's one bolt up on the back at the top, and then there's two bolts on the front. This one here, and then one up at the top have all got to come out. And then I believe I've got to drop the sway bar here. I've got to undo these attachments for the sway bar, so it will swing down out of the way, and so you can drop the alternator down. Because I don't think the alternator is going to come between these power steering lines, I think. Anyway, so we're going to get that off first. I believe it's a 12 mil, but yeah. Okay, so that's a 12 mil. We'll loosen that off, and then we'll get to taking the bolts off. Okay, I have two of the bolts out now. I have the one out by the tensioner, which was the easy one to get out, and I've got the rearward one at the top. I'll just show you where it is, and then I'll show you the one I'm left fighting to get at. Okay, so the second bolt is right there. That's the finger for the alternator. The second bolt goes in at the back there. You can get at that with an open end wrench or a ratchet wrench. Now, the third bolt is on the other side here. I'll try and show you how fun this is to get to. Okay, it's hard to get light on it here, but that's it there. So it's behind this pipe, under the power steering pump. The only way I've really been able to successfully get at it is to remove the overflow bottle here and go in from this side with a wrench and get at it. And I suspect this is the easy part. I expect putting it back in is even more difficult. But anyway, one thing at a time. So we're going to get this bolt out using every ounce of patience I have today. And then I guess we'll have to drop that sway bar to drop it down, and then as it drops down, we can disconnect the wires on the back. Okay, so I have the alternator out. So this is the top bolt at the back. This is the top bolt at the front, the really, really fun one. This is the bottom one, the front that goes where the tensioner arm is. There's a small wire, I don't know if it's a ground or what it is, small wire on a spade that goes here. And then the big spade goes on here. And this is the white wire that goes up and charges the battery. And then there's a 2-pin plug here. You just got to squeeze and that comes off. And you can see that there, but you've got to drop this. You do have to drop the sway bar. Now, thankfully, the sway bar and everything was all out and restored, so anyway, you can see there the sway bar drops out of the way, and then you can wiggle the alternator out of this gap here. So what I got to do now, according to the manual, see, there's the plug, and one of the wires on that plug is brown and white. So I'm going to put a spade, plug it in to the brown and white wire there, and you're supposed to ground that. And that should then, with the ignition on, the alternator or volts warning lamp should come on. So we're going to see if that's the case. If not, supposedly there's a problem between here and the lamp. So we're going to try that. Okay, let's try and see what we got here. Oh, look at that. oil pressure and volts warning light. Excellent. Well, excellent. What that tells me, according to the manual, is the fault lies within the alternator or the voltage regulator, which is in the alternator. So, either way, we're going to be replacing the alternator. So I'm glad I got it out. Glad I did those tests. Those tests tell me that all my wiring to the alternator appears to be just fine. Another bonus for a car this age. So we'll order a new alternator, and then we'll have that fun of putting it back in. I will, while waiting for it to get here, try and muster up all the patience I can, because I know I'll use every bit of it putting it back in. Okay, our new, or I should say, remanufactured alternator has come in. It's an AC Delco Gold, which is impressive, should be just fantastic. I've checked it. It does seem to have exactly the same mounts as the other one. So the other one was actually an AC Delco too. So hopefully this one lasts longer, although to be fair, I'm not sure exactly how long that one was in. Comes with a lovely little booklet too. Couldn't help but notice there's a checklist of things that have been checked on maximum current and volt tests and turn on speed tests, but it's not been filled in by anybody. It's just printed. So I guess we're just assuming it's all been done because they're confident enough that they actually put it into print ahead of that work all being done. So it should be good. So I'm going to go clean up the contacts and whatnot under there, and we'll start the install process. Now, it should be the same as taking it out. It should be the exact reverse of that, except of course I'll be fighting gravity as well. So I'm not sure how lining up the bolts will go, but we'll get her done. Okay. The only way you can get this alternator in is the same way you get it out, which is to stuff it up from underneath. So I've pushed it up. I've gotten the bottom bolt into the adjusting bracket, little banana bracket down there that adjusts the tension. I then pushed it up, and I've gotten the back bolt, the one by the exhaust manifold, in, although I had to remove the fuel filter to do that, because I know I got big hands. I don't think I do, but the access is painful. Now I got to try and figure out how to get the bolt back into the front, where the cooling pipe, the rigid cooling pipe from the thermostat down to the blower rad hose, is basically right in front. And I absolutely don't want to be draining the cooling system and taking that apart again. So we're going to try and get the front bolt in, and when I finally get it in, I'll show you how I did it. Okay, so it is now in the car, the alternator. This front bolt that goes in here did prove to be unbelievably painful to get at. If you go down here, especially with the coolant overflow bottle moved out of the way, you can actually get effectively 2 fingers down there, and there's enough room to get the bolt lined up and pop it in. The issue then becomes trying to align the hole in the alternator with the threaded hole in the bracket on the front. And I spent, I don't know, about an hour and a half doing that, trying to get one bolt in. Took every bit of my patience and then some. What I ultimately ended up doing was putting a scissor jack and a piece of wood up underneath so I could very gently lift the alternator up and then jiggle it up here till we finally got it that it lined up. And once that's done, if you have one of these ratchet sockets, or ratchet wrenches rather, you can actually get that down under here and it'll tink, 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 tink. You can get that tightened up. The other one down there is, nowhere near as difficult to do. I I did end up also loosening this off. I took this belt off, just gave me a little more room working under there. It's just so tight to get to anything under there. So anyway, there we are. It is at least back together. It's late in the day now, so I'm going to finish up, get everything back in tomorrow, and then give it a test. See if we have, after all this, if it has indeed actually fixed it. I sure the heck hope it has. Okay, so that's just showing there. There's the scissor jack and a piece of wood, I guess. Anyway, it's what I use to push the alternator up into place to get it, to help get it to the right height to line that front bolt. Because it's just me, it's one person. So anyway, it's all in, it's all connected now. Fan belts are back on. So pretty much one of the last things you got to do there, once you've done that, is there's a tensioner here that you'll have taken apart. So before you snug down any of the bolts on the alternator, adjust that, get your belt tension right, and then you can tighten down the bolt that sits up on that bracket, and then you can go up on the top and do the final snug down on the two bolts. Alright, that's a gauge showing it's charging 14-ish volts, I guess now. It's a good thing. Alright, so I got the car back on the ground, the wheel on, and I just started up, ran it for a few minutes. You might be able to hear it going tink, tink, tink back there. And I've checked the voltage at the battery, and I got 14.3 roughly volts there. So it does indeed appear that the alternator is now charging the battery. I have a bit of a squeal, I think it's from a belt, so I got to adjust that a little bit there. But I do believe I've actually got it charging a battery now, which is a very good thing. So what I got to do now is put the sway bar bushing clamps back up and the splash shield back on underneath. And she's back together. And yeah, I think we're one step closer to getting out on the road. I hope the video was helpful. I know I didn't show a lot of me doing things, but frankly all you would see is me hunched over and cursing while I try to reach bolts. It's only 3 bolts. It's the access to them that makes it such a challenge, and I hope I've showed or explained how I went about it and what you'll be up against if you have to change an alternator on your Z31 Turbo. As always, like, subscribe, always appreciated. Drop a comment if you want. And thank you for watching, everybody. You have an awesome day out there.